Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Today, inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to share with you 3 steps that will help you retain that which you study in a class. Many times, students of knowledge attend a lesson and they finish the lesson and they may remember many of the benefits that they've taken. But after a few weeks, they would have forgotten the vast majority of that lesson. So inshallah ta'ala, with the permission of Allah, these 3 steps will help us to retain that information for a longer period of time. And so these 3 steps are linked with that which we do before the lesson, during the lesson, and after the lesson. So let's begin with the first tip, inshallah ta'ala. Step number 1 is to prepare yourself for the class. Don't just enter into a class and not have any idea of what is going to be studied during that lesson. Rather, before the class, make sure you read ahead. If you know how much your teacher usually goes through in a lesson or how long he usually teaches for, read that amount before you enter into the class. That way you'll become familiar with the topic. If there's anything new to you, you can read ahead and try to understand it before the lesson. So for example, if you're studying Umdatul Ahkam and your teacher usually teaches 4 or 5 hadith a lesson, then read those hadith in advance. Take advantage of websites like sunnah.com, which allows you to read the hadith and search for the hadith and read it in Arabic and in English, and it gives you a decent translation of the hadith as well. Secondly, you want to be able to skim read the syllabus that you're studying. So for example, if you're studying fiqh and you're currently in Kitab al-Tahara, know exactly where you are in Kitab al-Tahara. Are you in the chapter regarding wudu? Are you dealing with ghusl? Are you dealing with water, etc.? Knowing where you are in the book will allow you to get an understanding before you've entered into the lesson. Another way that will help you prepare for the lesson in advance is to understand where you are in that book. So for example, if you're studying fiqh and you know that you're in Kitab al-Tahara, try to look at the contents page and try to predict which chapters the sheikh or the ustad is going to be teaching in your next lesson. Thirdly, you should try to prepare any questions that you have in advance. So as you're preparing for the lesson, as you're reading ahead, you may come across certain things that you don't understand. You may have previous questions that were unanswered. You need to jot those down so that either during the class, the ustad or the sheikh, he will answer those questions, or he may not answer them, so you might need to ask those questions at the end of the lesson. Step 2 is that all of your senses are fully engaged during the lesson. So the first thing I would advise is the manner in which you listen. And so you need to attend the class and be ready to be actively engaged in the lesson, being attentive, listening to what the speaker is saying, sitting close to him, turning off your mobile phone, removing any other types of distractions that will take you away from focusing on the lesson. Secondly, your notes need to be organized well. And there are many different methods in terms of how to take notes. And that would all depend on what you're using to take notes. So you could be directly writing on the actual book that you're studying. You might have a notebook that you've taken along with you. The point is that you must have some sort of structure when it comes to writing down your notes. Thirdly, is that during the lesson, if anything is not clear, you must get it clarified. So if there's an opportunity to ask the sheikh or ustad a question at the end of the lesson, make sure you ask, make sure those questions are clarified. And during the lesson, if a question comes up in your mind, then make sure you jot it down and ask it at the suitable time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلُ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. And so we have to learn the manners of even asking questions, how to approach the teacher, what dua should we say before asking the teacher a question. These are all from the adab and the manners of seeking knowledge. Fourthly, try to highlight key evidences that the teacher mentions. So that could be a hadith, it could be an ayah of the Quran, it could be a statement from the Salaf, if those are key pieces of information, they need to be highlighted in your book or in your notebook. So if you come across something during the lesson and the sheikh, the teacher, says that this is the asl of this bab, this is the most important hadith or evidence for this chapter, that needs to be highlighted, that needs to be written in the side so that you retain that information. And finally, from that which will help us to retain this knowledge is learning the manners of sitting in front of the people of knowledge, sitting in a respectable way, not being so casual, removing distractions, turning off your phone or at least putting it on silent, sitting cross-legged, yani not leaning against something, not fiddling with anything during the lesson. All of these are from the manners of seeking knowledge that we find from the people of the past. And that's why Imam Shafi'i, he even said that I used to even turn the pages really slowly during the lesson so as to not distract the teacher. Step number 3 is to revise the notes that you have taken from the previous lesson before the next lesson. Ideally, a student should do this on the same day. Yani the same day that they've studied that lesson, maybe in the evening, etc. They go through those notes. And it takes you about between 5 to 10 minutes just to go through those notes that you have taken down. During this time, if there's anything unclear that you've written down, you can correct it as well. And so you should allocate yourself a time for revising your notes. So even if it's, for example, 10 minutes after Fajr, you allocate that time every day to review your notes, then that would be good. Secondly, if you can create your own summary of the lesson and write that down, that will help you to retain that information bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. In that summary, you could just mention the most important parts of the lessons, or maybe even the most important evidences for that lesson. The point is that you take some time to reflect over that which you've studied in that class, and that reflection will help you to retain that knowledge bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Thirdly, there are many memory techniques that can be used. So for example, you could do your revision by just writing out flashcards. So an app such as Anki could be used, where every lesson, at the end of the lesson, you might take everything that you've learned, turn it into question and answers, and create flashcards out of it. One of the unique things that Anki has is something called spaced repetition. This is where, when you're revising those flashcards, it will repeat the flashcards more frequently or less frequently based on how well you know that information. So flashcards are definitely a great way to retain information. Number 4, try to find opportunities to discuss or even teach that which you have learned. If you're able to explain the information to somebody else, that's a good indication that you've understood the lesson. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned in a hadith that convey from me even if it's one ayah of the Quran. So whether it's a family member, whether it's your wife, whether it's friends, try to take an opportunity to share some of the benefits that you have taken from the lesson. And finally, as you are doing your revision, if you come across something that is incomplete, if you come across something that you didn't fully understand, or if while you were studying there were more questions that you had, write those questions down and try to ask them during the next lesson as well. So to conclude, we've mentioned that these 3 steps, if any student of knowledge follows these 3 steps, they will be able to retain the information that they've taken from a lesson for a longer period of time. And so that is being prepared for the lesson that you're about to attend. When you attend the lesson, engaging in the lesson, all of your senses being present. And finally, after the lesson, you review that which you have taken from the previous lesson before the beginning of the next lesson. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to all benefit from this reminder, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid us all in our path of seeking knowledge. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.
ختامه مسك